Good evening, I'm Savannah Kelly. Welcome to APTN National News. There was a round dance for Pimicikamak Cree Nation outside the Manitoba legislature on Thursday. Pimicikamak is still in a state of emergency almost 2 weeks after a power outage in the community caused frozen and bursting water pipes, flooded basements, and a community-wide evacuation. Julia Ross reports.
Pimicikamak is in a state of emergency. Why? Because a willful decision at all levels of government not to act. 11 days this community had to sit watching their house and sewage pour. Why? Because of failure to act. When I look at statements from the federal government that they are entering the recovery stage, I'm telling you, nothing could be further from the truth.
Winnipeg Centre MP Leah Gazan says she was asked by the Pimicikamak Chief and Council to come to their community on Wednesday to provide political and human rights oversight. Manitoba Premier Wab Kinew, a number of Grand Chiefs, and Federal Northern Affairs Minister Rebecca Chartrand were also in the community Wednesday. Gazan says the Liberal government in Ottawa is willfully failing the community.
Not only is there a state emergency now, but because of a willful failure to act by all levels of government. They have issues with their water treatment plant now. They have raw sewage that is freezing on the ground that will thaw in the summer. We could be on the verge of a water crisis in Pimicikamak worse than Walkerton.
Band councillor Shirley Robinson said she traveled back to Pimicikamak for the first time Wednesday.
I went in and out. I didn't even get to see my house to assess my own home. But I came back here because our people are displaced. They're lonely. Our elders are crying. They miss home. The children to be secluded in four walls, that's not healthy.
Robinson says that the community is struggling without water and that she hopes to pressure the government to act now instead of later. Currently, Pimicikamak has evacuated members across Manitoba.
4,000 plus people displaced, and our community is just under 10,000. That's like almost half our nation displaced, and being displaced is traumatizing.
This is the second evacuation for Pimicikamak members in 1 year. The first was last summer due to the worst wildfire season ever recorded in Manitoba. There is no timeline for when people will be able to return home to sleep on their own beds. Julia Ross, APTN National News, Winnipeg.
And an update to that story. After many days of Chief David Munias asking Prime Minister Mark Carney to approve military assistance, the Canadian Armed Forces will be deployed to Pimicikamak Cree Nation. Eleanor Olszewski, minister responsible for emergency management, made the announcement Friday afternoon on social media. She said a team of Canadian Armed Forces members will be going in for a targeted assessment, advisory support focused on water treatment and sewage, power regeneration, project management, and logistics. The minister said the decision was made in response to requests from the Cree Nation and the province of Manitoba. She said the military support will reinforce teams already in the community working on damage assessments, providing generators, heaters, food, and drinking water lacking since the power outage. No word yet on how many personnel are going in or when they will arrive in Pimicikamak. In a statement, Chief David Munias said the military will assist the community and not govern it, adding, "The military's role is strictly to help stabilize essential services and support our recovery efforts. I want to personally thank the minister for the late-night calls, the steady communication, and the swift internal coordination that made this deployment possible." The year 2026 has just begun, and Quebec has already seen its second femicide of the year. Since 2020, a monitoring project created by the Quebec newspaper La Devoir has been keeping track on spousal murders. As of October 30th, 2025, there's been 70. La Devoir says that about 10 Quebec women are killed each year because of domestic violence. On January 5th, Mary Ekikuk Tukalak, 54, died in Puvernatuck in northern Quebec. Her partner, Lucas C. Tukalak, was also found dead at the scene. The case was treated as a femicide followed by a suicide. After that, in 2022, Mary Tukalak was allegedly the victim of domestic assault causing injury. The investigation was transferred to crimes against the person. Marjolaine APTN, president of the Federation of Quebec Indigenous Women, said that this is an issue that must be addressed collectively.
C'était une toute première table de concertation, je vous dirais, qui a eu lieu là, en décembre dernier. Quand je vous parlais d'un travail collectif, je pense que ce travail-là, qui a été amorcé en décembre de 2025, va être un travail qui va être important pour les années à venir. Ce que j'ai entendu, effectivement, des gens qui étaient autour de cette table-là, c'est que c'était une table vraiment nécessaire pour pouvoir aussi se parler.
First Nation safety officers in northern Manitoba intercepted a large quantity of drugs and alcohol bound for a dry reserve earlier this week. The officers were checking into a report of a stranded vehicle on a winter road near Bunny-Bonnaby Cree Nation, some 575 kilometers northeast of Winnipeg. They found the vehicle around 12:30 a.m. Wednesday with 209 bottles of liquor, more than 850 grams of crack cocaine, more than 200 grams of cocaine, and a small amount of methamphetamine. RCMP were called and they say 5 occupants were in the vehicle, 4 from Bunny-Bonnaby and 1 from Winnipeg. A 34-year-old Bunny-Bonnaby woman was sent for medical attention due to injuries RCMP say were likely from an assault. The other occupants, ranging in age from 18 to 43 years, were taken into custody for possession and trafficking-related charges. The Manitoba Inuit Association has a new CEO to lead the Winnipeg-based nonprofit. This follows a grassroots social media campaign dubbed the #InuitMeToo movement that brought sexual assault allegations against the former CEO to light. Former CEO Nastania Mullen was fired in November. Gail Grubin was appointed MIA Chief Executive Officer in early January. Grubin, who is originally from Tuktoyaktuk, Northwest Territories, has been with the MIA for 5 years, working on missing and murdered Inuit women, girls, and missing Inuit children of residential schools. Nastania Mullen held the CEO position since 2022. The Salvation Army building in Prince Albert, Saskatchewan was destroyed by a fire just before 8 p.m. on Christmas Day. Local fire officials are now working with the Prince Albert Police Service to see if the fire was arson. The warming center, which fed roughly 100 people each day and provided overnight support for about 60, is now a shell of what it once was. Firefighters tried to extinguish the blaze from the inside, but a breached roof and heavy smoke made conditions too dangerous. Crews were, however, able to protect nearby structures. The fire department completed its investigation earlier this week and has turned the case over to police to determine if the fire was criminal in nature. Prince Albert Police Service told APTN they don't know the cause of the fire and are continuing to investigate, but would not confirm further details. We need to step aside for a quick break. Stay with us. The Trump administration is wasting no time making headlines this year, starting off with the invasion of Venezuela and capture of Nicolas Maduro. Now the administration is turning its attention to Greenland, threatening to take over the autonomous territory of Denmark for what the U.S. calls national security purposes. And Trump says he's not opposed to using military force to make that happen. So where does this leave Canada in all of this, especially in the north? Here to talk to us today about Arctic security is Ken Coates, Professor Emeritus of the Johnson Shoyama Graduate School of Public Policy at the University of Saskatchewan. Ken, thanks so much for joining us today. To start, what are your thoughts about the Trump administration's recent actions and threats of invasion? Is this something Canadians should be concerned about?
Canadians should be concerned about it, but it's hard to know what we should be concerned about, and which is a strange way of answering the question. We're living in the most uncertain of all times. We have a president of the United States who's completely unpredictable, who goes madly off in all directions, who invades Venezuela one day and then makes claims against Greenland the next day and talks about buying half of the continent. this is insane. And we've never ever dealt with anything quite like this. There's so many norms of international relations and diplomacy and government action. President Trump is ignoring all of them. And of course, he has a whole series of domestic crises going on at the same time. And so it makes it really hard to know what to do. And at this point, Canada must decide what its own roles and ambitions are, has to protect its own integrity and its own sovereignty. But right now, we're not doing a particularly good job of that either.
And how prepared is Canada to defend the Arctic?
Let's just say that if you and 10 friends decided to go with your hunting rifles up to Nunavut or Northwest Territories or the Yukon, you'd have a free rein. We have some wonderful folks up there. The Canadian Rangers are extremely competent. They're very well trained. They go out on the land all the time. They're a great set of eyes that sort of cover all the north and do a really excellent job. But the reality of it is that Canada, the Canadian North, is perhaps one of the most unprotected areas on the planet. Now, the Department of National Defense very appropriately will tell you that we actually have it all covered, that we have radar systems shared with the United States through NORAD. We have sort of response systems through airplanes that are based in Cold Lake, Alberta, or Petawawa, Ontario, and we can get up there and do some things. But the reality of it is that the Arctic is pretty much undefensible. What do you do if somebody wants to attack you by land? Where are they going to come from? If they're going to come in by submarine, well, we have the longest coastline in the world, and we can't possibly manage all of that. If they come in by air, we haven't got enough planes that can actually go up and sort of stop somebody from doing that. So there's no obvious way. It's not to criticize the government of Canada, it's to respect the fact that we don't really know what to do. We don't have a clear A, B, C, D, E sort of response that would make this thing much better off. What we haven't done, and this is the one thing Canada can do, is reassure the people of Canada that we have their backs. Reassure the people of the North in particular that the government of Canada is on their side and willing to do whatever it can to protect it in cases of any kind of invasion or assault on our sovereignty. And it's hard to say that we've done that. It's a decent military base now in Yellowknife. The Yukon has, I think, 4 permanent members in the entire territory, which is tiny. Nunavut has almost nothing. So, we can do a lot more to reassure the people of the North that, in fact, there's something in place. And I'll add a really quick thing. One of the most important areas in the country is actually from Labrador to northern British Columbia. It's across the provincial north. And when we talk about the North, we always talk about the Yukon, Northwest Territories, and Nunavut. Very important. We never say anything about the provincial North. And that area has a substantial Indigenous population. It has much of the country's resource wealth. Strategically and economically, it's more important than the territorial North. And we don't even talk about it. So we always say, well, what are we going to do for Caledon? What are we going to do for Yellowknife? What do we do for Whitehorse? Nobody ever says, what are we going to do for Churchill or for Thompson or for La Ronge or for any of these other Labrador City? We don't even talk about the provincial North. And that's actually where some of our vulnerability is the greatest.
And how would you say Canada compares in this area to other northern countries like Finland, Sweden, or Norway? What are they doing that we're not?
So the Scandinavian countries, the Nordic countries, are doing much, much better than we are for good reasons. Russia's right there. Norway and Finland both share borders with Russia. If you go and look at the northern Norway, it's right across the border, and there's hundreds of thousands of people within 150 miles. Finland has a very long border with Russia, and they have military bases, almost every 100 miles along the entire road. And Norway and Sweden and Finland have spent a lot of money on air defense, but the distances are much shorter. They can work collaboratively. They have all 3 countries willing to sort of collaborate together, plus with NATO and things like that. So they have, in one sense, an easier job, but a more dangerous job, because the Russians are on their doorstep, and they're on their doorstep every single day. So the people of the Nordic countries live with the reality and the threat of sort of Russia's penetration all the time. The better analogy would be Australia. Australia has this huge outback. It points up toward Indonesia, so toward China, yes, indirectly, toward India. They do a much, much better job. Darwin area around the Northern Territory has a much larger military establishment than any place in the Canadian North. They have military bases sort of across the region. We can do so much better, particularly, and I emphasize this, particularly if we look for what are called joint use projects. where we actually look and say, let's build the infrastructure so we actually have a fully protected and fully prepared area. Electricity, internet connectivity, having proper airports and facilities in the area, having search and rescue capabilities across the whole region. That's where our deficiencies really, really stand out. So if Canada really wanted to get ready for all of this, we would actually do those things quickly, and we would bring the far north up to Canadian standards in all those key infrastructure areas, so that if something did happen, we could actually move troops and supplies and other activities into these areas quickly. So we are sort of, the race is getting ready to start, and we're still sitting back in the changing room trying to get our shorts on, and you really can't compete with other countries when you're doing that kind of thing, when you're so far behind the starting blocks. I hope the race never starts. We have to pray and work hard to make sure the race never actually takes off. But you cannot compete if you actually haven't got the preparation done, and that's the problem we have right now.
Great insights on there, Ken. We'll have to leave it there for today, but thank you so much for taking some time and joining us today.
Anytime.
A member of the United Nations Permanent Forum on Indigenous Issues was one of 17 Indigenous leaders whose homes were searched by Russian authorities. This, according to the International Indigenous Peoples Forum on Climate Change, or IIPRC. And as Angel Moore reports, in addition, the co-chair of the IIPRC was arrested and detained.
This is last spring at the United Nations Permanent Forum on Indigenous Issues, where thousands of leaders, activists, and organizations gather to discuss Indigenous issues. Valentina Saukiva is Sami and an advocate for Indigenous rights. She is a member of the forum and was re-elected for the 2026-2028 term. Last December, Saukina says her home in Russia was raided by the Federal Security of the Russian Federation. She spoke to APTN News in Russian from Norway. The answer is on the surface. I think it's for our activism, for our concerns for the fate of our nations. We always were the voice of our peoples and peoples who live on the territory of Russia. So it was the intimidation campaign. Daria Yegoreva is Selkup, an indigenous group in Siberia and co-chair of the International Indigenous Peoples Forum on Climate Change, IIPFCC. She has attended the last 3 COPs, an annual summit where countries meet to discuss climate change. IIPFCC says Yegoreva's home was also searched by Russian authorities, and she was arrested for allegedly participating in a terrorist organization.
Не должна быть безнадежной, и она должна привести к спасению. И я очень поддерживаю Дашу Егореву, и я переживаю в плане того, что как она себя сейчас чувствует, потому что мы на самом деле не знаем, что происходит.
We don't actually know what's going on right now and what kind of pressure she's under when a person is under arrest. Our solidarity and close attention is with her from all of the people who can support her now. The International Indian Treaty Council, that represents over 98 nations from North and South America, released a statement. This is a grave case of intimidation and reprisal against an Indigenous leader in direct connection with her participating in the UNFCCC process. The International Indigenous Peoples Forum on Climate Change said in a press release that this is a targeted attack on Indigenous leaders who participate in United Nations processes and advocate for Indigenous rights. Some people have claimed asylum after being monitored by Russian authorities. Luda Kinuk is originally from northeastern Russia, but she obtained asylum in 2017 in the United States and now lives in Hawaii.
They started questioning 38 of my family and friends. Like they were inviting them to their office, to the base, and started. And one of my friends actually confessed to me saying that he was reporting to them every day what I had for lunch, who I saw that day. So just complete. So I realized it's better for my family if I'm just not there.
IIPFCC says Yegoreva may be detained for 2 months while being investigated and may face 10 to 20 years in prison. Angel Moore, APTN National News, Jabutuk, also called Halifax.
Hockey Night in Canada in Inuktitut returns this weekend. We'll tell you more after one final break. Stay with us. Welcome back. Time now for our photo of the day. Frost-covered trees provided this amazing view from Jenna Presley, who then thought of all of us. This was taken in Winnipeg, Manitoba in the Windsor Park area. Thanks for sharing that photo, Jenna. You can send your photos to share@aptn.ca for the chance to be our next photo of the day. Now, let's take a look at tomorrow's weather forecast. 6 degrees for Halifax, 3 degrees in St. John's. -7 in Nain, Kuujjuaq -5. Val-d'Or -7, 0 degrees in Quebec City. Toronto, 0 degrees there, -4 in Sault Ste. Marie. -5 in Kapuskasing, -17 in Big Trout Lake. -25 for Churchill, -15 in Thompson. -11 for Gimli, Winnipeg, and Princess Harbour. -5 in Regina, -3 in Saskatoon. -10 in La Ronge and sunshine, and -4 for Buffalo Narrows. Hockey Night in Canada in Inuktitut will be returning to APTN starting this Saturday. This Saturday, catch the Vancouver Canucks playing against the Toronto Maple Leafs with Inuktitut commentary. APTN and Sportsnet will be hosting 3 nights of Hockey Night in Canada in Inuktitut, followed by 3 games with commentary in Plains Cree starting this March. Pujuk Kusaguk, David Ningyuan, and Robert Kupvituk will be returning as the Hockey Night in Inuktitut hosts for the 2nd year in a row. Growing up playing hockey together, the 3 bring their excitement delivering the game to audiences in their language. Coverage begins at 7 p.m. Eastern. Up next, we have host Kim Sullivan to give us a preview of the first Nouvelle Nationale of 2026. Tansi, Kim.
Hey Savannah, Happy New Year. It is our first show of 2026 and unfortunately starting off with not the best of news. Already 2 femicides in Quebec, one of them happening in one of our communities. Also everyone talking about Trump in Greenland, so we have to touch upon it too. We do have a beautiful story of a young chef who's returned to his roots, opening a restaurant that celebrates his heritage, and we did sit down with the new mayor of Montreal. All that at 6:30 Eastern.
Thanks for that, Kim. And that's all the time we have for your APTN National News this Friday. For news anytime, visit our website at aptnnews.ca. I'm Savannah Kelly, and from all of us here at APTN News, Marcy Miigwech, thank you for joining us. Take care and have a great night.